All right. Welcome, everyone. It's so wonderful to see all your faces. Welcome to God Talk, conversations about faith, society, and self-love for LGBTQ plus Christians. So I am Carol Kiesling. So I just go by Carol and with she, her pronouns. And I'm coming at you from Taos. My son Marco is in the next room with his caregiver and our wonderful friend Lisa. And Alex, could you introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Alex. I'm here in Houston. I go by the pronouns she, they, and I'm really happy to be here with you guys. We are gonna start off with going around the room, the virtual room, and having you guys introduce yourself. Give us your name, the name that you would want to go and be addressed by, and also your pronouns. And if you have a nickname or had a nickname that you had when you were younger, or even now that you go by, feel free to share that. We're gonna start with you, Carol.
Okay. I'd just like to go by Carol, but I was a Girl Scout camp counselor and I went by Strawberry when I was a counselor. And I really liked it. I thought that was fun, but you can just call me Carol. And I use she, her pronouns. And I just want to say at this point that pronouns are important. Sometimes in each group, there's it's somebody's always kind of tempted just to say, you know what, it doesn't matter. You can call me whatever you want, but it really does matter. And for some people, it's life or death. So I just want to acknowledge that. And you can also, some people have had a little trouble, but if you want to change your name or add your pronouns to the name on the screen, you should be able to do it by clicking those three little dots up at the top of your name. There you go, Suzette. Suzette's telling you how to do it. So we're going to go next to Marco and Lisa. Marco, you want to tell us your name, your nickname, and your pronouns? Get that food. Yeah. Lisa, maybe you should go first.
You know what? I'll jump in here because he's being very responsible and chewing his apple very well. I'm Lisa, and I go by she, her, and I'm so happy to be here tonight. Are you good, Marco?
Yeah, I got you.
Okay. Okay.
I go everybody. Maya Michael. I go get him bum. But I go get Michael. I got to keep by.
What he's saying is that he was a king for Halloween, and so since then he's been King Marco, and so that's his nickname. And you go by he, him pronouns, correct?
Yeah, man.
Okay, why don't you call on somebody else that has not gone yet? The middle of the screen, Larry.
Yeah, go.
Can you see me?
Hello, I'm Larry. I go by Larry. I used to go by Lair, but it just got to be too confusing to tell people that, so I gave it up. My pronouns are he, they. I identify as agender fluid. My agenderness is what is fluid. It's kind of weird, but that's me.
So weird.
Guy, go Will.
You want to call on somebody else?
Let's see who's next to me. I'm trying to think who it is. Pilar.
I knew you were going to say me. I'm Pilar Morgan. I go by she, her pronouns. And my nickname, believe it or not, was Peter. It still is Peter to a lot of my family, or Pete. or P, something like that. When my sister, I just got off the phone with my sister and she was like, P, let me tell you. Oh, Pete, let me tell you. I was like, oh boy.
I like that.
Oh, Mona.
I think
There,
you're
but
muted.
yeah. Well, I'm Mona. My good friends call me Mo. My work friends call me Mo. My church friends call me Rev. So, and then I answer to a bunch of other ones, but so in any of those are fine. I'm her and she. And I'm gonna work on changing my name here, but I'm not successful yet.
How about Craig?
Oh, Craig.
I'm Craig. My pronouns are he and they. And what else? What else am I supposed to say?
A nickname that you had, or or one that you might like to have if you.
Well, the people in Forever Blessed call me Craig Boy.
Yeah,
The quartet
boy.
I sing with at church. They call me Craig Boy. I guess maybe it's because, and I wasn't even the youngest one in the quartet, but they just call me Craig Boy. So I guess that's my nickname.
Super cute.
That is. How about Suzette?
Hi, I'm Suzette, and I go by she, her. And this question about nicknames, I went back kind of a long time in my mind about nicknames, and some of them give me PTSD. So I'm only the ones that my family called me Susie my whole life, and then when I became of probably the age of 14, I was telling everybody my name is Suzette. Don't call me Susie anymore. So my family calls me Susie to this day. And Christy calls me Sue. So the other nicknames, I'm gonna keep a hold on to them. And I will pick Rev Denise.
Hello, I'm Reverend Denise, and I go by she, her, and I have lots of nicknames too. And so, but my family, really, close family call me Niecy, which is a common nickname for Denise. Sometimes I like to call myself Nene, but that's just when I'm feeling like, just really in that happy space, but I never do that outside of the house. So it's always only at home. I'll call myself Nene.
Okay.
So who has not gone yet?
I think everybody that's on screen
Everybody.
has, but how about
Jojo.
Okay, Jojo.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, I'm JoJo. I go by any or all pronouns, leaning more towards they. And I'm Reverend Denise's partner. And that's it.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing. For me, believe it or not, Alex is my nickname. My actual name is Alejandra, but that's a mouthful, and everybody calls me Alejandro or calls me Alexandra. So I just gave up on using my actual name. Not even my parents used it. So I've been Alex for the past 29 plus years. But you guys are more than welcome to call me Alex. That's my preferred name by now.
Okay.
All right. Thank y'all for sharing.
Yes, thank you. So we're just going to talk a little bit about what this class is. God talk is another way of saying theology. In other words, how we think and talk about divine presence. And think and talk are the operative words there. It's different than other kind of sciences, other kind of ologies, like geology or biology. In those, we could examine a rock formation or dissect a frog or something to find out more information about the subject. But in this case, it's not something we can touch or feel. God is a mystery. God is not to be defined. That's why this is a conversation and not a class. And that may be new for some of us to even consider how we talk about God. If we were brought up in certain types of churches, we may have been just told to who God is supposed to be for us, what we're supposed to call God, and God fits in this nice little box. But I'm here to tell you that it's okay to examine that box and and open it up and take God out. Let God go free.
Yeah.
And we're going to have a little fun with this during this, but and why it matters is, let me just give you a little piece of that. For example, if you were taught that God was condemning, that and you're just kind of walking on eggshells because you think maybe you're going to get sent to hell the first time you trip up and that's God's doing, then it's just really hard to develop much faith or trust. It's if it's okay for God to condemn us, then it's okay for you to condemn yourself. It's okay for you to condemn others. And it's because after all, it's really hard to aspire to be better than your God. Who can be better than their God? That's am I right? That's so on the other hand, if you imagine God as love itself, as this beautiful experience that allows us to experience and share love and trust, then love is going to be a lot easier to flow in between us. So that's part of why I think that theology matters and why it's so interesting and helpful to look at this and discuss it. So through these sessions, we're going to discuss who God is to you and how God speaks to you, and maybe we'll just open that up a little bit through these weeks.
Wow.
And so to that point, within the LGBTQ plus community, for me, been hurt by this oppressive or even toxic theology that this kind of messaging that we receive is that God is condemning and cruel towards the community.
So these widespread messages are often subtle. Sometimes they come from very well-meaning sources who've also been taught it down through the generations. And so we may not even realize how we've internalized these messages. The trauma can really run deep. No wonder so many people have difficulty developing a relationship with the sacred. Our church, Resurrection MCC, strives to build community to heal those wounds.
And I want you guys to know that this group is a safe haven where we can explore, question, discover, embrace a new perspective of how God works, not only within us, but through us. And that you guys, regardless of our labels, it's a safe space for us here.
Yes. Well, I'd like to share with you just some things that'll help us keep this a safe space. These, you could call them guidelines, but I'd like to think of them more as agreements. And Alex, if you have time to share your screen and put some of these up where people can kind of look at these bullet points. If you have any questions or concerns, or at the end, if you have something you might want to add, then feel free to do that. First of all, let's just talk about privacy. This is a meeting that's being recorded, but not just anybody in the public can go and look at it. So I would encourage you to keep talking about some of the things that we discuss here in between our sessions, but I want to caution you not to share private personal information about anybody else. We all have various degrees of how vulnerable we feel when we share, and you don't want to take for granted anything that anybody says. Just keep to general topics, or just sharing about yourself and not someone else's story or private information. One of the things that is just key to our discussions, because we're all going to have a lot of different opinions and a lot of different experiences. So it is okay to disagree. It is not okay to shame or blame yourself or others. So we're going to just try to covenant within this group to just raise each other up. And just kind of caution each other when you notice somebody saying something like, oh, I can't believe I was that stupid, or something like that. That's not how we talk about ourselves, and we sure don't want to talk that way about anybody else. So also another thing that will be very helpful is to practice both and thinking. That you might even want to consider using and instead of but in your speech, in how you talk about things. Just that helps us just open ourselves up. And in the same way, try it on is something, and that goes for ideas that we're discussing. If somebody has something that you've never even considered before, then maybe just try it on for a minute and just see, wait, is that something I could incorporate into my own belief or value system? But I'd also like you to try it on in terms of just practicing getting out of your comfort zone. For example, if you're somebody who likes to share and just, is all gung-ho and wants to answer every question first, consider just holding back a little bit. On the other hand, if you're somebody who tends to not contribute to group conversations, you might see if maybe this is a safe enough space where you could jump in first as a change of pace. So just try it on. Take responsibility for your own learning. This applies, I think, most clearly when we're talking about diversity and marginalization. We all have we're a diverse group in many ways, and we all have areas where we feel or we are marginalized, like our sexuality, our gender or gender expression, also many ways in which we're privileged. Just the fact that we're all able to be here, we all have some sort of mobile device that allows us to, and Wi-Fi access, and here in a free meeting. So that's privilege a lot of people in the world don't take for granted. So what taking responsibility for your own learning means, just kind of being allies to each other in whatever groups we fall in, and but not trying to burden someone else with who's in a different group that we are, to teaching us how to be an ally or how to be more helpful. That's just a caution not to burden each other. Intent and impact, what that means is that sometimes we say things that we intend as being nice or at least harmless, and we say something and somebody else is like, ouch, and that's okay just to say ouch in these discussions. And so that's a difference between how you intended it and how it impacted someone else. And so I would just like us to take responsibility for our own words, even if we didn't intend them poorly, just to try to look at why that might have hurt someone else, and open yourself up to trying to make it better if you can.
And we refer to these agreements and these guidelines as agreements because of the type of conversations that we're going to be having. Some of them are very ingrained and rooted in who we are and how we believe. And we just ask for patience and understanding. We want to move towards a more broader and expand our imagination into an understanding of a God of love.
So we're going to be talking some about our personal experiences. I'm just going to share a little bit. My personal journey doesn't have a huge amount of religious trauma. I remember learning way back in Sunday school about a God of love, and love was modeled by my parents. Church overall for me was a place of community and learning where it was pretty much okay to question, and I did a lot of questioning. That's not to say it wasn't without negative messages, things even that like being told I shouldn't acolyte because I was a girl, things like that. But overall, it was a good experience for me. And in fact, learning that so many of my friends were so traumatized by religion and just refused to go back to church or anything like that was a big motivator for me to go to seminary. I wanted to try to find the words and teachings to help heal from that, help others heal from that. I just hated the thought of people throwing the baby out with the bathwater, that, in other words, giving up on faith and all faith communities. To me, good religion is about relationship. It's about our relationship with the divine, with each other, with ourselves. And MCC was a huge catalyst for starting that journey for me to learn about that. And I wanted other people to be able to find a wonderful experience of God and community in church as well. So I first walked in MCC in the 1990s and became a member when I lived in Galveston. And to me, just like relationships, my relationship with God became kind of like it's like falling in love. And when you fall in love, it's like you want to get to know somebody better. You want to learn more about them and spend time with them. And so if I can help bring that about for some other person, and a relationship changes, whether you're in love with a romantic partner or a child or whatever, your relationship changes over time and expands. And so I hope that our relationship with the divine presence can continue to expand and grow.
I love that you placed it in those terms of a relationship. So for me, my relationship was a very rocky relationship, and I'll share why in just a minute. But before I do that, I want you guys to raise your hand if you've been taught by someone else who God is. I know I have. I wasn't born believing in God. I was taught who God was, and I was taught by my mom. And once I lost my, thank you for raising your hand, Jojo. Once I lost my mom, I was left in this very critical space where I needed church. I needed to heal and to grieve the loss of my mom. And with my mom, a lot of conversations were revolving around God. And I wanted to feel that again. And I was raised in a Catholic church, and I hit a wall when I went to church because I was being excluded. And it made me want to not believe in God, because of, if that's the God that they're talking about, then it made me not want to be with God in a relationship. It made me want to break up with God. And as we started doing this and preparing for this class, I started thinking of the different stages in my religious process. And I was a shaped believer. My mother shaped me into believing who God was, and I learned from her. When I lost that very grounding piece, I entered a stage of questioning, where I questioned who God really was. Was it what they were presenting to me in church? Was it what my mom explained God to be? Was it who I had now began to interpret God to be and expected God to be? And from there, I entered a struggle stage where I needed that grounding force. I needed God in my life, but I was afraid to rely on God because of my orientation. And I've had heard enough that message that God was not gonna be there for me because of my orientation. And God was not loving me, that everything in my life was happening because of my orientation, my desire, who I chose to love. And as I was in that struggle stage, I started realizing that a lot of the messaging that my mom had given me as well was very homophobic, that she interpreted God as this being that was not loving of me. So I had to throw that out of the window and just go back to the drawing board and realize that a lot of the choices that were happening in my life, a lot of the things that were happening in my life were based on choices that I had made. And a lot of the beliefs that I sometimes started to believe, that because of who I was, that God was punishing me. I had to realize that that was not God saying, I'm punishing you. That was my belief of what someone else had taught me. And I had to take a step back and also think of the times that God was speaking to me and think, how is God talking to me and speaking to me? Because I've missed that turn because I was so focused on God punishing me. And in that struggle stage, I started realizing my choices were leading me down this path. It wasn't God punishing me. And that my conversation with God was really important. And I needed to find that voice. And I needed to pick up the line, pick up the call whenever God was calling, and not continue to think that God was not loving me. And I entered the faithful believer stage. And it's not to say that I don't live in that struggle or that I don't have that questioning stage. It's just learning for me to really know how God is talking to me. And I want to invite you guys to think and meditate on who God is to you and how does God speak specifically to you. Because even with speaking with Carol, God speaks to us both differently. And you were sharing that the other night, Carol. Do you want to share?
Which part are you referring to?
How God was speaking to you, how you realized that God speaks to you based on flowers.
Oh yeah. I think that sometimes there's just I think the first thing that I mentioned to Alex was more recent. There's sometimes just maybe some of you have experienced this, you're just lying awake in the middle of the night and just you can't go back to sleep. You're worrying about something or whatever, or maybe or whatever. And sometimes if I can just relax enough and just open my heart up to God, it just sometimes it just feels like God has given me a big old hug, just just there. I think the first, what Alex is referring to, the first time that I just felt that personally was when I used to live in Amarillo on a there weren't many houses or people nearby, and so I would just walk this little trail, and I would even sing. But I remember one time just seeing this little bitty beautiful just perfect, just dainty little flower just kind of hiding under the rocks, and I thought, God must have put this just for me. I mean, who else is going to see this gorgeous flower right here? Nobody uses this trail. This is for me. It's like just a little love note from God. So I'd like to hear. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, do any of you guys want to share how you've now come to realize that God is speaking to you?
You may even want to go back even further and share something before things started feeling better. You might want to go back to that first stage of what we're taught to believe, or what we're not born believing, and then what we're taught to believe. And so you could either share something of how God speaks to you, or maybe one thing you were taught about God that does not ring true anymore. We've been
Anybody
talking.
wants to share? Safe space. Pilar?
I was waiting for someone else to go first, but no one else went. I grew up as a Jehovah's Witness, and my parents taught me that anything you did wrong was seen as bad by God. So as a little kid, all I heard was bad, 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 bad. And one of the things my father would tell me was, God doesn't hear your prayers because you're bad, you're being bad. And I wasn't necessarily doing anything wrong, but let's say I would wet the bed as a child, well, because I wet the bed, I was being bad. And because I was being bad, God wasn't hearing my prayers. So one day, after I was told that God wasn't hearing my prayers, I scribbled a note to God and I stuck it out the window, and I watched the wind take the little piece of paper up. And I thought to myself, that's one prayer he got, and I had to be like 5 years old at the time with that type of reasoning, because I felt like I always knew God was there. Even before I knew who he was, I felt the presence, that's it.
I love that. It just gave me goosebumps.
Me too.
I appreciate you sharing, and at such a young age that you knew that God was there and God was telling you, yes, I'm here, and let me come and get that note myself,
Right.
and bring it up.
Right.
I love that. Suzette?
So I didn't grow up with a God of oppression. I grew up in the Lutheran church where God was a God of love, it was the gospel of Jesus. And, I went to church every Sunday. My mom not made us, but we went to church every Sunday. And from the time I was little to the time I was, an adult, went to church. But when I was about 16 and a half, my parents divorced. And I was the oldest and the only female. So I kind of had a lot on my shoulders, and I had somewhat of a breakdown. And what kind of triggered that was I was on the couch one day, kind of in a really afraid place. Like, where is my life going? Who is going to be here for me? And I was just terrified. I was having panic attacks, and it was the beginning of 10 years of debilitating panic attacks. But there was a commercial on TV that I had never seen before about Billy Graham and the four horsemen, I guess it was, and Revelation and all this other stuff I'd never heard before. I mean, that just like threw me over the edge. I was like, what the heck is this about? I never heard about this. I don't know anything about this. And then it even threw me into a bigger question of, oh my God, where is God? What kind of God was I believing in my whole life? So it took me a really long time. And I never said, oh, I'm not going to go to church anymore, because that scared the hell out of me. But I had to do a lot of self-discovery about what religion and faith and spirituality and God was on my own terms. And it's okay now. But there's a lot of times in our lives where we might not be prepared for the message that's thrown at us. So that was just part of it. And then as an adult, when I, came out, my father really had a problem with that, but it never came to being a religious thing. Anyway, that was my kind of awakening about who God is in my life, and how God applies to me personally. So that's my God story.
Thank you. And thank you for personalizing it, that God speaks to us all differently, and our view of God and our relationship to God is all different.
I think I was devastated because I thought, oh my God, I'm losing my relationship with God the way I thought I had it. So I had to rediscover it and realize that God was still a God of love. So anyway, it was awful times.
Thank you. Anyone else wants to share? So within that, and have you guys ever realized that how your conversation with God, like your own conversation with God, might shift or change your view on how life is and how you treat others? Like, have you guys ever noticed that shift or difference in your life at one point or another?
I started being nicer to people once I stopped thinking that God was a man or a male.
How do you mean, Craig? How did that cause you to be nice?
I was raised Catholic like Alex. But not, I went to catechism and all that. I probably only went to Catholic church until, I started playing drums on the road with my family. But I learned more about God and stuff from my grandparents, who were very loving and so forth. And actually the nuns at Catholic church, when I was little, they always told me I was special and that I was going to be a priest. It wasn't until 30 years later that I realized they knew I was gay when I was only 7. Yeah, just the idea of when I came into the awareness that God isn't or doesn't have to be a gender-based being, because I'm one of those people that had kind of an emotionally abusive father. And so, you know, like I said, I became a more friendly person once I stopped thinking of God as a male, or, you know, in that aspect.
I kind of want to deconstruct that with you over a couple of hours one of these days.
It's kind of adding that humanistic view of God, that label that God is a gender, that might even deter us from having that relationship with God based on, again, our personal experiences and what has happened to us.
That's a really good point. I think, but I think for me, just like Craig, just taking that masculinity that out of it helped me initially a lot, because I think I was, like I said, I understood God to be a God of love, but God still seemed very far away. And just learning that even in the Hebrew scriptures, there were feminine images, you know, words for God, like for the spirit and things like that. Just really helped me think of God as somebody, as a person I could approach, as a person that could be a friend. And I remember some of the early days in MCC. I remember words like Father, Mother, Lover, God. And I thought, lover? Could God be my lover? But all of that, just thinking about those different types of relationships and things just helped helped me start on that journey to deciding for myself and just developing that personal relationship as opposed to just accepting what my church taught, which was Lutheran as well, like Suzette, but I bet it was a more conservative branch. But anyway, but I think what you're saying about even going a step further and not and thinking of God as beyond gender, as not even being a person. I heard a sermon not too long ago that really spoke to that and talked about God as love itself. And it says that, and it talked about how we need to take those masculine qualities and just also provide the other side to start kind of equalizing, as well as to just recognize the image of God in us all, and it include in all genders, not just male and female. But still putting a gender on God at all does create like some distance. If God is like a person, then there's still, you know, God is not like within us. But if God is love itself, if God is more than just loving, then God can't be anything but. If God is the experience of love living within us, God can't choose to be anything except love. God can't be cruel, that because it's not in God's nature. It would be like, you know, expecting water to turn into fire or something like that. Love doesn't harm. Love doesn't cause fear. Love doesn't condemn. Love doesn't judge. And so even taking that personification out and just saying God is love really opened up some possibilities in my mind.
Yeah, I would agree. I think thinking about God in terms of love, and also it's important, at least for me, and I'm speaking from my perspective, that in the times of struggle, in the times that are difficult for me, to remember about that love. And there's love all around us, not just within us, because sometimes there's a lot of difficulty in our lives that are part of what's going on in life, but being able to see that love externally and listening to those messages that are coming with love when it's in the absence of, it's there. And I agree. God, there's a lot of love to God, and God gives us that love.
We say a lot in our community, love is love is love. Where do you see, I wonder, for those that are in relationship or in a same-sex relationship, how do you, or in any romantic relationship, where do you see God in that? Is that the force of, if God is love, is that the force that binds you together?
For me, I would say yes, as someone who didn't get married until I was 53. You know, I remember sitting in a class on a Wednesday night class with Reverend Kristen Klein Ketchett. I can't say her last name. It was called A Prosperous Heart. And, you know, I thought at that time in my life, I felt fairly prosperous in all areas except for, you know, romantic love. So at that point, I decided to start creating the relationship and the love that I wanted. And I knew that God had to be, the divine spirit had to be the center and the focus of that relationship. And 10 years later, here I am with Paul. So, yeah, yes.
I appreciate you emphasizing on God being at the core, at the center of that relationship, and knowing that you wanted that through love and through God, and now you're here.
Yes, it was just a validation that, you know, okay, so I'm a gay man, and it was just a validation that what I had wanted my whole life, yes, a relationship with another man that is based, you know, on God's love, that is interested in spiritual things, you know, that puts spiritual matters and things first. Yes, that kind of a relationship is possible. But what I didn't realize is that I had to start creating that relationship inside myself first, before, and then start projecting that out. And that's, you know, finally when it came to me. It took a very long time, but it was worth the wait, as they say.
Would you say that in that moment, as you were creating that relationship with God, that in a sense you were healing and patching that relationship with God?
Healing what?
That relationship with God.
Oh, yes, definitely. I think healing is a process that I'm going to be going through for the rest of my life, every single day. You know, there's something that has to be healed. But yeah, I'm a big time believer in the fact that I think I'm co-creating my experience with God, you know, and I feel like it's my responsibility to create the life that I want. God has given me the capabilities, the talents, and skill sets to bring forth from the universe the things that I desire. And I've found that if I desire things that vibrate at a high frequency, that they just come to me. You call that prayer, you call it meditation, whatever, but it's just pulling it in, you know, pulling that unconditional, God's unconditional love, pulling it in, and just look at all the wonder that it creates, all the wonderful things that it creates in your life if you're just open to it. And it helps you get through the, you know, the not so wonderful times in your life too.
I love the message of co-creating and realizing that you're co-creating with God. That it's not that you don't play a part in it, but you do through your relationship with God, and you placing God first, establishing that relationship, and now coming to the point where you're co-creating with God and coming and accepting that responsibility. You are taking responsibility for what comes next because you are accepting that role of co-creating something magical, something special, something filled with faith, something filled with that peace that God wants to give us.
What do we do with those times when it's not, when our life doesn't feel like it's at peace, or we feel like, oh my gosh, if I co-created this, I must have done something wrong. Why is this so? What do we do with those kind of moments?
Suzette.
Well,
I was in a point of real turmoil. The first time I ever went to an MCC church was in Spokane, Washington, and it was Christmas Eve, and I was like broken, 100%. No, I lost my job, horrible failed relationship, a million miles from home, no way to get back. I was in the pew of this poor little church, just crying my eyes out. And but I had decided that at that point in time that was going to be the tie that binded me to anyone else in my life, was having somebody that put faith first, or put God first in perspective. So that was a checkbox for me going forward. And it made it was the game changer for me in my life. Finding a person who had the same connection with God that I did, to be in a relationship with, was something I'd never had before. So I immediately started to have hope again for my life, and hope again for the future. And, you know, hope came back into my life when I went back to God. So part of that was relationship based, you know, personal relationship based, but the rest of it was making sure that I knew where God stood in my life when I went forward with my relationships for the future. So So MCC has been a huge part of who I am today. And I'm so grateful and thankful for this church in a way that I can't express with words. So I think it's important to tell people that that can be a possibility for you if you just open yourself up to it. So that's me.
Larry.
I sometimes think, and those of you that don't already know me, I tend to be a little extreme on my thoughts and beliefs, and as soon as you introduce the class as theology, my nerd self just was doing a happy dance and everything else over here. But I almost feel that almost everything that we've been taught about God is wrong. Going all the way back to where my heart is breaking, you know, thinking about little Pilar as a little girl, and God's not going to hear her prayer because she did something wrong, and Craig talking about his co-creating with God, and then Carol mentioned about, well, but when things are messed up, I guess I co-created that too. And I almost think that as humans, we have centuries and millenniums of trying to work out these two questions that I wrote down right at the beginning. Who is God and how does he speak? Well, that first question, who is God? You know, people have been trying to answer that question for thousands of years, and some people have been arrogant for thousands of years to have figured that out and tell everybody else. and here we are. And I almost think that everything that we've been taught is wrong. And I think almost everything we've been taught about prayer is wrong also. I think that as human beings, I don't even think we have the ability in our finite little brains and our finite bodies and our finite world to even begin to comprehend the infiniteness that is God. And I don't know if it's because we're American or whatever, but we always think that, you know, it's all about us. It's all about us. And God is up there somewhere just waiting to see what I need. You know, it's like there are so many millions and millions of people here, and the things that we pray to God, like for this and that. And I just really don't think it's works that way. And, you know, I'm just speaking what I think. You know, a lot of times I'm in this massive collection of Venn diagrams, and I'm the only one in the little center spot. But we live in such a wonderfully interconnected world of systems and cycles and causes and effects and consequences, and so much stuff is going on that sometimes good stuff happens and didn't have anything to do with me. Sometimes bad stuff happens, it didn't have anything to do with me. And it doesn't matter whether I prayed for it or prayed not for it, or, you know, it's almost like, even when I catch myself praying, I'll be finished with my prayer and said, you know, my whole prayer didn't even match my theology on what I believe about prayer. But we can't have all those habits that make us feel a little good. I think that's good. And I think, oh, Pilar, I just want to hug you right through here. I want to hug that little 5-year-old girl and tell her, says, girl, they wrong. Girl, they wrong. You know, God always hears our prayer, and God's always there, but God isn't always concerned about all the things that we think he is. In fact, I was arguing with my mother about that earlier. I was over at her house and something wasn't going right. She said, well, you just need to pray about that more. I says, well, Mama, what if prayer's just not enough? She says, well, then I didn't teach you anything because prayer's always enough. I said, well, Mother, no, it's not. So anyway, that was just kind of my throw in here about, yeah, we have a part to play, but not everything that happens, good or bad or whatever, has anything to do with the part we play, because we're these little bitty specks of almost nothing in this great big matchup of all these interconnected and overlapping systems and cycles and everything. It's like almost everything in this world's on automatic pilot. And maybe that is God. Maybe God's the automatic pilot and he pushed that button like 3 million years ago and he's just watching these crazy people running around. Okay, that's not really a conclusion, but I'll stop.
I wonder how you came to question what we're taught. If everything we're taught is wrong, I mean, we kind of start from that point of what we're taught, and then maybe it's kind of like a little light bulb comes on and you're like, wait a minute. For me, that was some of the I think MCC churches helped start that process for me, just seeing and honestly, the first thing that attracted me about MCC was just that I went to Resurrection and it had this lively music and people were standing up and clapping and it was an interesting sermon and it was just, it wasn't like sitting in the church I grew up in and just, I learned piano from like 2 notes on the left hand and 2 notes on the right and just sitting and taking notes on a 3-point sermon, and it was all very monotone. And so it was just the joy and the excitement and the beauty and the camaraderie of the worship that first attracted me. And I went, wow, if worship styles can be this different, and if the church I was taught where, somebody said, I said something about, wow, this church is just so serious. And I remember my cousin saying, well, church isn't supposed to be fun. I was like, and then MCC just kind of counteracted that for me. And it was fun. And it was, I felt like I could be myself and you didn't, just didn't feel like you had a straitjacket on. So for me, that's where it started, was just having a little fun. I wonder what else triggers other people to start questioning what they were taught, or expanding. Maybe it's not even questioning, but adding to the taking away some of the limits of what they were taught.
I have a very real of understanding how that worked for me, and I'll try to be brief. My parents were teenagers when I was born, and then my little brother was born a 1.5 years later. My dad was a pastor in the Church of the Nazarene. We lived all over the world, and it was just the 4 of us, and so we didn't have family around for holidays and everything. At the time we lived around the world, you could only afford to make a long distance phone call once every 3 months. I mean, that's because everything we didn't have contact. We'd make little tapes and send them. So it was just the 4 of us. And what is so wonderfully unique about my family growing up, me, my little brother, my mother, and my father, is you could not have possibly had 4 human beings that were blood related be more different. In our family, nobody was like anybody. And growing up, even as this little queer boy, I was never more okay than I was in my house, because in my house, everybody's different. There's nobody like anyone else. And with my dad being a minister and church being such a vital part, I observed my parents arguing. I'm just going to use the word arguing over truths in the Bible, in theology. Growing up, that was just, you don't understand, well, then you talk about it. So it's always been an okay thing to question. My mother still tries to do that with me some. It's not as fun as it used to be, but it's like, so the questioning was never a thing for me. When someone was talking earlier about, growing up, I never ever questioned that God didn't love me. In the faith that I grew up in, sins were something you did on purpose, and you knew you did them. So you never messed up on purpose. It was all about intent. So even once, I'm dealing with being gay, I know I didn't do anything. So I was kind of okay that way, but I had to work through it. But anyway, questioning was always a good thing. Yeah, my mother, I just moved her 2 miles down the road from me. And yeah, and she's used to just arguing everything with my dad. And since he died, it's just like, okay, I get to get all this now. It's like, I don't want some of this. But anyway, questioning it was a good thing for me, always was. So
Suzette?
So Pilar mentioned that she grew up in the Jehovah's Witness faith, and I got my religion from my mom. My dad was Catholic, and he wanted us to all be Catholic, but he didn't go to church. So my mom was like, well, I'm not taking my kids to the Catholic church if he's not going to go to church. So she picked the next religion that she thought was closest to the Catholic faith, and that was Lutheran, but it was Protestant. So all of her sisters, I grew up around the questioning of, I watched her from a distance. Her sisters tried to bring her into the Jehovah's Witness faith. And I remember going to Bible studies, and she would go to different houses of people, and it was about learning about the Jehovah's Witness faith and all this other stuff. When my aunts would come to New Jersey, where we lived, they would have these giant assemblies in New York, like at Yankee Stadium or whatever. And I always wanted to go because my aunt made everybody matching dresses and all this other stuff. And it looked like so awesome that, what they were doing. And I wanted to be a part of it just because it was social and it had dresses involved. But my mom would never let me go to the assemblies with my aunts. And she never converted from her faith to Jehovah's Witness. And I never had that conversation with her about why, but I did see her as somebody who never really spoke her mind and never really had a strong opinion about anything. But she did about that. So that is a really interesting conversation I probably want to have with her someday. As far as why did you choose what you chose, and it did have an impact in my life because we didn't become part of that faith. And so bringing that up was just learning about who God is to somebody that I was important to me, and watching her go through her own spiritual journey on what was acceptable, what wasn't acceptable, and who God was to her. So it rubbed off a lot on me. But anyway, thank you for letting me share.
Yeah, I'll chime in and just say I was thinking about where I got my concept of God, and certainly I know that it came from family, growing up as Baptist, and hearing certain messages, and all of the messages were pretty judgmental, because it was in the you know, it was exclusively Black Baptist churches that I was experiencing. And I just remember the messages that were always, you're not supposed to do this, you're not supposed to do that, you know, and, you know, all this judgment. And yet what was interesting, as a little girl, I remember just looking around and I'm saying, but that person does this person does that, you know, like when they talked about adultery, and I'm thinking, okay, you know, or my mom, I had, you know, my mom was, you know, we had you know, my mom was married 3 times, you know, so, you know, what is the preacher saying to her, or talking about drinking, and I'm thinking, okay, I went to the pastor's house once after choir rehearsal. It was playing with his daughters, and for some reason I saw inside the refrigerator and there was beer, you know. So but the interesting thing was that it made me, you know, just curious about why are the messages the way they are, and it was just so contradictory. So I never really held on to any particular image of God. It was always other people's perception of God that I just noticed. And then in my early 20s, I started going to the Church of Christ, which was ultra conservative. And I absolutely loved being around the people and all of the joyfulness and the singing. And when it came to the messages, I loved the style of the pastor. And at some point in that sermon, I would start hearing about all these people who were gonna go to hell because they did not believe like we believed, or like the Church of Christ believed. And so that's when I was like, okay, there's a line in the sand, because you can't tell me Mahatma Gandhi is going to hell. You can't tell me that Martin Luther King Jr. is going to hell. So I started doing all this research, and I started my research reading about the Church of Christ and what they believe, because had just became part of it, so I didn't know, and what they believed. And so I mean, I scoured through every book I could find on the teachings. And then because Jehovah's Witness was, oh my God, you mentioned Jehovah's Witness in the Church of Christ, and I was like, you know. So then I started reading, well, what does the Jehovah's Witness believe? And so what I started to learn was that there were all these different ideas. And what seminary taught me is sort of the reasoning behind, you know, some of the ideas and the separations and the schisms and all this kind of stuff that happened. You know, so I think, you know, just, I know I connect to this world, and I know that God created me. And so I just firmly believe that I am, my intention is to be in sync with that creator, and to listen and to hear and to know what my purpose is. And so it's really hard for someone else to tell me, I'd say to tell me about God. And I say this because I remember, Larry, when you were talking and you talked about being arrogant, and I'm like, well, I'm pretty firm. I don't know if I would label it as arrogant, but I'm pretty firm in my beliefs, and no one can tell me any different than who I'm listening to, because I have learned to trust that voice. Because what life taught me as a little girl was I can't trust what the adults around me are saying. That I have really got to be plugged in for myself.
Wow. Pilar?
That was so good. When I was a girl, when I was a kid or growing up, you didn't question God. And I never felt the need to question God, because we had a great relationship and we talked all the time. I had a need to question people. And you weren't allowed to do that either. So I was always in trouble for that. Because you couldn't just tell me, well, God doesn't allow this. Well, I wonder why. Well, because such and such and such and such. Well, why? Why such and such and such and such? Why do you choose that? Well, because such and such. Well, but what was the relationship between that and that? I don't get it. And so I got in trouble a lot for just having the nerve as a girl to question so much. So at 11, I asked if I could start going to, because my dad was Jehovah's Witness and he was, what do they call it? Inactive. He was inactive. He hadn't been for about 2 years or some, several years or something like that, because my mother didn't like the religion at all, but she had no religion. So I started asking if I can go to the Kingdom Hall of Jehovah's Witnesses. And they were all for that. They wouldn't let me go anywhere, but they let me walk to the Kingdom Hall of Jehovah's Witnesses. And I was really happy because I got to meet with people who believed in God like I believed in God. It wasn't until I got a little older and started understanding more of the beliefs, because I was 11 at that time. Some of the beliefs that they had that I didn't agree with. And that was, especially when you hit hard times and you can't go to your faith, you know, you can't go to, I remember when I first got married, I got married really young. I was about 18, 19 years old. And I went to them and I said, you know, he's really hitting me. And they said, well, because you chose to be unequally yoked, we can only tell you to run because you chose this for yourself. So I was like, that doesn't seem very godly. So I would question that. So I was just always, I ran straight to the divorce attorney. But I remember thinking that's not a good response, because that has nothing to do with God, how my God will react, you know. One of the things I felt all my life to this day is I've always felt God's presence. God presented himself to me as male. So that's how I see God, as male. I don't know if that's because I needed a strong father figure in my life, or if it's because my relationship with my mother was so bad I didn't want to see God as a woman, or what. I just know how he was presented himself to me. He gave me, I guess, what I needed. So it reminds me of that book, The Shack. Any of you familiar with The Shack? And how God presented himself to this white guy as a big Black woman, you know? So it reminds me of that. God just presented himself a certain way, and I've just taken it as that. And I've had to be pretty open-minded going to MCC. Because at MCC, sometimes we say she, sometimes we say they. And when I first heard that, I was like, they call God she. Oh my goodness, what's wrong with them? You know, but God didn't take me, he didn't remove me from MCC. He let me know that that was the place I needed to be, was right where I was. I started going to MCC in 2006. I came out in 2006. And for some reason, MCC popped up. Never heard of them before. So I know that was God bringing them into my life, you know, and that was in Dallas. And then I started going to MCC Resurrection in 2008, and I've been there ever since.
Yay. I love the way that just sounds like just all your life you have questioned and yet still been surprised about other things like the gender, like people using she for God and things like that. So that's beautiful how you've come to that. I wonder, I'd kind of like to start wrapping it up for tonight. I wonder, but I don't want to leave anybody hanging. Was there somebody that felt moved to speak? Jojo, I noticed that you came up, and you hadn't before, so I wonder if that was because you wanted to say something.
I think my video froze.
Oh, okay.
I'm okay now?
Yeah.
Okay. I grew up Catholic, and so I guess my idea, my perspective of God was formed by all of that. Going to confession and from second grade or third grade, and then it was like, what am I confessing? So, I lied to my mom and dad. I stole a piece of gum from the store, and it kind of, as I grew up, like it was like God didn't like anything I did, and it created like this self-hatred in me eventually, I guess. And so I'm trying to like deprogram myself from all of that. And I questioned everything. And luckily my parents would allow me to question it. They wouldn't really answer questions like, really, Jonah was in the whale. In the whale. He was in the whale. And then the snake like tempted Adam and Eve, and they're like, yeah, that's what it says in the Bible. That's what, this is what the church believes, kind of thing. Kind of like Santa Claus, and so and I still question to question a lot of things, but now I'm kind of moving towards like God is love. God doesn't hate anything, and even when I say love and hate, those are all judgment kind of words, those are so I can't even fathom for me what God is, male, female, because those are labels that we put on people. And so for me, it's just this, for God is just loves everyone. I mean, growing up, like I say, growing up Catholic, if you murdered someone, an eye for an eye kind of thing, and they're very, it's there are rules you have to follow, and so you get punished for those, if you break the rules kind of thing. Then there's this purgatory thing. And for me now, I'm kind of like, God loves everyone, even the people that in my mind are like, what, that they did that, yes, God loves everyone. So that's my little 2 cents.
Wow. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. I wonder if anyone would like to volunteer for next session next week to there may be people that join us that weren't in this session that would like to give a synopsis of just some of the themes and things that we've talked about.
I think going forward, I'm going to invite my note-taking app to the conversation. I mean, we have recorded this, and it also has the captions, so anyone can review it. Okay. But it might be good to just have a synopsis, like you said. So I'm going to present that going forward so that we can put a synopsis into the description of that particular session. But I can help with that.
Nice. Okay.
Thank
so
you.
Go next session. We were learning that we might have that hopefully we'll have a guest with us. This guest is someone who is one of the authors in this book, Partnering with God. Now, our discussion group is not a book club or anything. You don't need to feel it necessary to buy this book or anything, but he has this is a set of essays about just what we're talking about, how these people in this book have come to relate to God, how they hear God's voice. And this man is an Episcopal priest named Jerry Monroe Maynard. I hope I'm saying that right. And his chapter just is very joyful and passionate. He talks a lot about sacraments and about embodiment, which I think is super relevant to our for our discussions and just for who we are. So I'm really looking forward to that. And so I think we're going to have some very interesting discussions coming up, and I hope you all can join with that. Does anybody have any lingering questions or concerns or things that they would like different? Marco, can you unmute?
Hey, guy, can you go? Yeah. Guy, where you go? The guy can make a man. Guy can make a big up. And my mirror got bike on me. Mirror, hey,
Remember what you learned in football?
yeah,
What was that?
got me. Hey, guy, get up. You got you. Guy, I can meet you. Guy, America. We get America, okay? We got egg.
You get mad or upset?
Yeah, I'm mad, okay. It's okay. But I don't think good. The guy you. Go. Get a worker. I got up.
Ninja warrior? Do you think
Yeah,
he's hot as a ninja warrior?
yeah.
Okay. Well, let's explore that more next time. I'd like to close with a prayer. Anything anyone else wants to say before that?
Okay.
Remember, you can always you can always contact any of us on the church online page on Facebook. My email and my phone number are on the notice for the class. So feel free to contact me anytime, any way that feels most comfortable. If there's anything we can do to make this more meaningful to you, please let us know. Let's go ahead and
You got it, Mom.
God of many names, we are so grateful for this sacred gathering and this time together. May our going forth now and our reuniting next week be blessed, and may we be a blessing to others. In the name of all that is holy, we pray. Amen.
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 Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I hope to see you guys next week, and just let's continue the conversation.
Yeah.
See you guys next week.
What a lovely start. Thank you, Alex.
Yes, yes.
Thank you,
you.
Carol.
Yeah.
What a
Thank
lovely
you.
beginning. See you
Thanks,
next.
Suzette. We
Bye.
couldn't have done it without you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Awesome
Bye-bye.
discussion. See you next time.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye.
Bye.